You're watching 12 WKRC TV, a new generation of news. 12 Newsmakers starts now.
Good morning and welcome to Newsmakers. In 1993, Cincinnati voters passed Issue 3, a charter reform amendment that forbids the city from passing legislation that specifically protects gays and lesbians from discrimination. Since then, open and frank discussion of the rights of gays and lesbians has gone underground in Cincinnati. Over the past few weeks, however, the issue has percolated to the surface with fresh vigor. Last Sunday, 1,500 gay, lesbian, bisexuals, and transsexuals, as well as a number of people who support them, marched in the first gay pride parade in 5 years. In addition, the decision of Procter & Gamble to stop advertising on the radio and upcoming television programs of national talk show host Dr. Laura Schlesinger has also stirred controversy. This past Monday, P&G agreed to meet with the representatives of 7 national organizations who object to the company's decision. 12 News reporter Rich Jaffe prepared this report.
The 7 pro-family organizations, including Citizens for Community Values and the American Family Association, say they like Dr. Laura's hardline anti-gay perspective.
We wanted Procter & Gamble to know how seriously we're taking this decision of theirs. We believe Dr. Laura speaks for millions of Americans when she defends the traditional family. She's one of the few mainstream voices out there who's dared challenge the myths of the homosexual activist movement. And for that, she's being blacklisted by Procter & Gamble.
It's that same perspective that's generated powerful protests across the country from more liberal-minded organizations.
We're concerned about family values too, and we're tired of just the rhetoric and the anti-gay attacks. We're going to continue to move forward. We support P&G in their decision to pull out from the Dr. Laura show, and we thank them for their courageous leadership and knew that they would get some heat about it.
It's this kind of passionate controversy that's apparently made P&G change their mind about sponsoring Dr. Laura's upcoming television show.
We found, for example, that Procter & Gamble puts Dr. Laura Schlesinger's program in the same category as World Wrestling SmackDown and as the Jerry Springer show. Our response to that is, we don't think so.
Right now, they're in the homosexual activist camp, and we're letting our pro-family followers know that. We hope that changes. We hope they restore funding or restore sponsorship to Dr. Laura's show.
In addition, tomorrow on Monday, the militant Reverend Fred Phelps from Westboro Baptist Church will be in, this is the same man who picketed the funeral of Matthew Shepard, the young man beaten to death because he was gay, will come to Cincinnati to picket P&G. To talk about the issue in general and the issue of P&G policy specifically, the planned picketing of Reverend Fred Phelps tomorrow, I am joined by 3 people. Doreen Cudnik is the executive director of Stonewall, Cincinnati, a gay and lesbian rights group. David Langdon is a vice president of Cincinnati-based Citizens for Community Values, an organization that fights against what it sees as the rising influence of gays and lesbians in community life. And finally, by the Reverend Damon Lynch, Jr. Reverend Lynch is working with an ad hoc effort to create a peaceful alternative to the expected protest of Reverend Phelps tomorrow. Welcome to Newsmakers, everybody.
Thank you.
David, what are the objections specifically of, let's face it, a business here, not a government agency, of P&G, of deciding not to advertise on a particular commercial radio and television show? How is that, how does your organization see that as a real problem?
The concern that we have with Procter & Gamble in this instance is that they have strayed from their normal advertising policy. What their stated policy is with respect to advertising is, very generally, is that they like to stay away from controversy. And they typically will review programs prior to them determining whether or not they will advertise on that program. They view them and then they make a determination. Here, we believe that due to a very small but vocal minority putting a lot of pressure on them, they have changed and strayed from this policy. The Dr. Laura show has not even been produced yet. There's no possible way.
You mean the television show has not been produced?
Correct.
The radio show has been on.
The radio show has been on. The television show has not been produced, so they've not been able to view these ads. Yet they've gone ahead and said that we refuse to advertise on this show. We simply want them to be consistent in their policy, and we've always appreciated P&G's policy.
Are you saying that you say that their policy is they don't want to advertise on controversial shows, and you say that they somehow have not made properly the judgment that Dr. Laura's show is controversial?
Not at all. I think that regardless of which side of the issue you come down on, Dr. Laura is a controversial speaker, and her show is very controversial. However, where they've been inconsistent is that P&G does advertise on what we believe to be very controversial shows. Let me give you for example, Ally McBeal recently had the first lengthy, passionate male-to-male kiss, and Procter & Gamble advertised on that show after having the opportunity to view that show. That show would be considered offensive to many people of faith, many religious-based people, yet they went ahead and advertised on it. I would say that is very controversial in this day and age, yet they've chosen not to advertise on Dr. Laura's show without even having seen it.
Doreen, one of the issues here, as David brings it up, is that P&G has yielded to pressure from a small group, is the way I think you put it. How much direct contact have you or your organization in Cincinnati, your base where the world headquarters is for P&G, how much direct contact have you had with the advertising people at P&G?
I've had no direct contact with the advertising people at P&G. I think that when they issued their statement about deciding to drop their advertising buy, what they simply said was that they were aware of a national controversy and they would choose to spend their money elsewhere. They didn't take a position either for or against Dr. Laura. Our contacts have been with the Gable group in P&G, which is the gay and bisexual lesbian employees of P&G, and we think what P&G did was a courageous move given their status in the city, given the fact that other advertisers look to them for leadership, and we've seen other advertisers pull out of the Dr. Laura show after P&G made their decision.
So do you think it was this group inside of P&G that exerted the pressure? Do you think that was the effective group? How do you believe the decision was made?
I think that P&G has created a climate in which they value the diversity of their customers as well as their employees. They began to hear from the Gable Group and other concerned citizens in Cincinnati that there was this national controversy about the show, and not just about what Dr. Laura says about gay and lesbian Americans, but what she says about working women, non-traditional families. So there was a broad-based response, I think, to some of her rhetoric. The Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation has been working on this issue on the national level for over a year now.
David, you were saying that they yielded to pressure. Was it amorphous pressure? Do you think it was this group inside of P&G, Gable, as Doreen just mentioned? Why do you think they actually changed their position?
Again, I don't have direct knowledge of who pressured them. We can speculate and say that, yes, it would have been Gable. Someone or something caused them to change their mind. They had originally agreed to advertise on this show. So obviously they haven't seen the show, so someone, we again speculate, went to them and said, we would prefer that you not...
So you don't really know who did it, it's just, okay. I want to move to what is supposedly going to happen tomorrow on Monday. This Reverend Fred Phelps, is coming to Cincinnati to picket. And as far as I can tell, he is sort of, he's out there, he's on his own path. On his webpage, he's got a whole list of places he's picketing, and P&G just happens to be one of those. But on the webpage, I'd just like to read something because I find this unbelievable on the webpage. He refers to, in the headline, by the way, up here, he refers to the Antichrist CEO, Dirk Yager. Well, this is a little late, but I mean, he's no longer CEO. But Antichrist CEO Dirk Yager, and one sentence here is, when CEO Dirk Yager pulled the plug on Dr. Laura because of fag caterwauling, and I'm quoting here, he made the P&G logo an everlasting symbol of sodomite shame. That kind of language, Damon, that kind of language, what does that do in a community?
It inflames the community, and it has no place in a biblical, religious type society. We who preach the gospel would never use that kind of rhetoric. He has some way got in his mind that he is the sole person that God has sent to clean up what he calls the homosexual community. He's way off base. He's not in the spirit of Jesus. He's not in the spirit of Ten Commandments. He's not in the spirit of the Bible, period. So the reason we're going to be out there Monday is to let people know that this is not about Bible. Reverend Phelps is anti to whatever the Bible talks about in reference to humanity, period.
Before we get to talking about what you and some other groups want to do on Monday, David, I want to ask you, from the CCV perspective, how do you feel about that kind of language and Reverend Phelps's activities?
I would reiterate what Damon has said here. I absolutely disagree, and I wouldn't want to in any way, shape, or form associate with that. I think that it's harmful, it's destructive, and I will make the offer now publicly that we want to do whatever we can to assist you, Damon, on Monday and in the future. Because it's simply uncalled for, and as Damon eloquently said, it's very unbiblical what he's doing.
Okay, so this is not reflective, just as some people feel they get thrown into a big group on other issues. You're saying that there are divisions in this group, and you're standing up and saying this is not what you stand for.
That's absolutely right.
Good.
I looked at that website this morning myself, and I was astonished.
I couldn't believe the website.
I think it's important, Dan, to note that the domain name of the website is godhatesfags.com. So that gives you an indication of where this individual is coming from. I wanted to point out, though, to David, while I appreciate your offer and you're publicly distancing yourself from Phelps, it's important to say that the group that was here on Monday to meet with P&G officials released a list of 28 what they called sexual orientations. And we believe that many of these sexual activities were on this list to frighten mainstream Americans, to make the argument that if we give gay and lesbian people equal rights, then we'll have to give rights to pedophiles and to individuals who engage in perverse behavior like bestiality. And so while, yes, you're distancing yourself from Phelps, there is some overlap in the type of rhetoric that often comes out to, I believe, frighten people and scare people. And I think that we go back to 1993 here in Cincinnati, and a lot of that worked, and that's why Issue 3 passed by the margin that it did. So I would ask you to distance yourself even further and distance yourself from that kind of rhetoric that goes out to frighten people and to alarm people and to lump gay and lesbian Americans in the same category with people with obvious disorders and sexual deviances that are not what we're talking about when we say sexual orientation.
You're speaking of perversion as opposed to orientation.
Well, I would say that some of the things that appeared on this list were necrophilia, were bestiality, were, I can't even recall some of them. They were so alarming. And the inference was that this is somehow in the same category with adult individuals who have an innate attraction to people of the same sex. That's offensive to us as a community. It's untrue. If you want to talk about issues of pedophilia, certainly that's something that transcends sexual orientation. I'm sure there are pedophiles and whatever sexual orientation the person is.
David, any response to that?
Doreen and I have a fundamental disagreement on what sexual orientation constitutes, and if we look back at Issue 3 and what it does is it prohibits preferential treatment based upon sexual orientation. So what we have to do then is define what sexual orientation is. Let's go back and reverse it. Let's say that we do provide preferential treatment based upon sexual orientation. That's a difficult word to define once you get beyond heterosexual orientation and get into additional orientations such as homosexual orientations. The question becomes, where do you draw the line? And our position is that once you grant preferential treatment based upon special orientation to, for example, homosexuals, then what is to prevent, and I hate to use the analogy, but what is to prevent necrophiliacs from then coming and saying, hey, you know, this is our particular orientation, and we believe that we're discriminated against, and we want special legal protection, and that's going to extend on and on and on to all different forms of sexual
Your point
orientation.
is sort of the traditional entering wedge, and once you've taken one step, there is nowhere to draw the line anymore? Is that your point?
To use the overused cliche, you've opened Pandora's box in that regard. Once you've gone beyond the biblical concept of sexual orientation, which would be one man and one woman for purposes of procreation.
Doreen, very quickly, we have less than a minute in this segment, and I'm hoping all of you can stay for a few more minutes, but what do you have to say to that?
Well, I know David is an attorney, so we define sexual orientation. That's how you get around that issue. Lawmakers define what they mean in the ordinance or the law that's being written. This is what we mean by sexual orientation. We mean two adults, and it does not include these other things. You also have a body of work by reputable mental health organizations, the American Psychiatric Association. And you know, homosexuality was removed as a mental disorder in 1972. These other things were not. And again, it transcends sexual orientation.
Okay, I have to take a break right now, but everybody stay right there because there's a number of things we haven't gotten to, and we'll be right back. Stay tuned. We're not going to give up on this. We'll be right back after a break.
Do you all agree to disagree?
Welcome back. We want to continue this discussion. Thank you all for staying for a few more minutes. Damon, one of the things that's been mentioned and referred to a couple of times is an effort that you're working with that is going to occur tomorrow on Monday. It's sort of as a counter to Reverend Phelps's demonstrations at P&G. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
We'll be there to try to offset the kind of venom that Reverend Phelps spews out. And just our presence should lend to the credibility of who we are and what we're trying to foster in this community, that we are a community of tolerance, and we are a community that feels that these things should be settled, lifestyle issues, by the church, by the religious bodies, and we would like to just get it out of the legislation, period. And we'll be there to say to Phelps and people like Phelps, because there are a lot of people in Cincinnati like Phelps. They are not as vocal as Phelps, but they believe what Phelps is talking about. So we're saying that, hey, we do not want this in Cincinnati because all it does is stir up the pot. What we're trying to do is make this a livable city for all of our citizens, and that's what we'll be there to say.
Concretely, what will happen tomorrow? What are the actual events? And I know, Doreen, you're involved in this as well.
Well, in response, when we heard that Fred Phelps was bringing his intolerance and hate to Cincinnati, we called a meeting of a broad-based coalition of groups, including MARC and the NCCJ.
MARC
Stonewall.
is the Metropolitan Area Religious Coalition of Churches, and NCCJ is the National Conference for Community and Justice.
Right.
Okay.
We came together as a community of gay, straight, religious people, all sorts of individuals to decide how do we want to counter this. Part of it was how do we support P&G for their courageous decision to value all of their customers. We determined that we would mount a campaign, a P&G products drive, collect P&G products that would then be given to area social service organizations like AIDS Volunteers of Cincinnati, Women Helping Women. And so far we've gotten a tremendous response from the community. We have several truckloads. We've gathered goods at Pride over the last weekend.
And my understanding is people can bring these at noon on Monday.
Yes.
There will be, is there a set place?
Christchurch Cathedral is a drop-off point downtown, so is the NCCJ office on 8th Street. And
Christ Church on 4th Street. Okay.
correct.
Right.
And we'll be having an ecumenical blessing of these products that have been collected for these charitable organizations. Reverend Lynch will be part of that, Rabbi Rick Steinberg, several
The dean at Christ
individuals,
Church,
the
I
dean
think.
at Christ
Right.
Church.
So, okay, so the point here is this is an effort rather than go out and just do a counter demonstration
Right.
and start yelling at each other. Is that the point?
Exactly.
To
One of
do something more positive.
Mr. Phelps likes to draw attention to himself, so the last thing we wanted to do is give him additional publicity and be down there with him screaming.
Okay. All right, let's move on to a different topic here, a slightly different topic. My understanding is that there is an effort to circulate a petition to put a reversal of issue 3 back on the ballot. Is that true, and where does that stand?
That is true. There's a group called Citizens, I'm sorry, I can't even remember. It's
Don't worry
working with
about
our Stonewall Citizens to Restore Fairness. The only option we have at this point is to repeal issue 3. As you said in your lead, the way the amendment is written is that it forbids the passage of any laws that would give equal rights to gay, lesbian, bisexual Cincinnatians. We're in the process of collecting signatures.
How many signatures do you need?
We need roughly 8,000 to 9,000 signatures, and
What's your hope about when this might appear on the ballot?
there's at this point it's too early to say.
Okay. David, what would your organization's position, what would your stance, I mean, obviously you know this is going on as well. What is your stance on this?
At this point, we don't have a stance. We know that it's going on. We will react to it when and if necessary.
Okay, so in the petition stage, you're not necessarily going to say anything at this stage?
At this particular point, no.
Okay. Damon, back when issue 3 was on the ballot, there was a lot of confusion about who supported what and who was opposed and wherever. And one of the issues, really, very honestly, was the Baptist Ministers Association.
I was president at the time, and we did not take a stand, but some of our preachers were very involved in it with Phil and community values, and so we allowed them to go ahead. We did not take a stand as a group that we would support or that we would not support, because we feel that the church is still the vanguard to handle lifestyle issues. And if we are doing our jobs, then we will be able to get the victory for Christ for everyone that's willing to come. So to go out and to deal with a lot of legislation was not what we intended to do. We want to let everybody know that we deal with fairness for everyone, and everybody should know that we saw that rights being violated, and if that was the case, then we're for everyone getting rights, because we know above all people what it means to have rights. And I could never find myself on the side of anything, and using the Bible especially, to deny someone their rights, because they did the same thing to us about rights. They used the Bible, and I can't go that route. So the Baptist Ministers Conference did not take a position.
What do you expect the Baptist Ministers Conference as an organization to take a position about the repeal?
I can't speak for the president who succeeded me.
You're not the president.
I would never get into that deep water.
Okay. Doreen, we only have about a minute left. I think you go.
Certainly. I just wanted to address something that David said earlier. He referred to special rights, and I hope that in the year 2000 we've moved beyond that argument. What we are trying to do right now in the city of Cincinnati, it's fine and legal for someone to fire someone from their job because they're gay or lesbian. Someone can deny me housing as a lesbian, and I can be denied services.
We have less than 30 seconds. David,
sorry.
I want to give you a chance to respond to that.
Sure.
Because we've heard.
I hope that we continue to use the terminology special rights, because that's exactly what we feel it is. It's a deeply held religious belief that I have, that if I'm an employer and someone is engaging in activities that I disagree with, that I should have the right to act out on my religious beliefs.
Okay, we're out of time. I want to thank everybody for coming, talking frankly, clarifying differences honestly, and yet you know, engaging each other. And obviously, this is an issue that we're going to keep talking about, and you'll be back on Newsmakers. Thank you very much for coming this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for making Newsmakers a part of your Sunday morning. Next week, the director of the new Metropolitan Growth Alliance and a talk with an amazing 96-year-old you don't want to miss. We leave you this morning, and have a good week.